And here, without further ado, is the latest chapter of Children of the Night, just for you, my readers and listeners. I hope you enjoy it. Children of the Night, Chapter 16, Temptation or Harmony. Twilight Sparkle stood, her muzzle agape, seeing that they had come too late. She herself had endured torture, and had seen what Chrysalis had done to her friends. What could she have done to Luna to make her turn into Nightmare Moon again? No, when she was true to herself, she didn't really want to know. She had come to know the Princess of the Night fairly well, and knew the amount of self-control she could rely on. No, she didn't want to know what had broken through that wall of self-control. All that mattered now was to revert it to just as they had done it before. Nightmare Moon slowly felt feeling return to her limbs. After finally being able to move about freely, it had been quite a shock to directly run into the only ponies that could be a danger to her. She already saw herself once again being enveloped by the rainbow, as she had been twice before. She could almost feel how the elements would tear at her, and how they would slowly push her back into the darkest regions of Luna's mind. Sure, the two changeling guards would have been no problem, even in her weakened state. Even their queen herself she felt confident she could defeat. The elements of harmony, on the other hand, were a completely different story. She had to think, and fast, or all her efforts to retake this body would have been in vain. Twilight Sparkle, I would have expected many things, but not to see you here. So, what will you do now? Will you help a fellow pony escape, or will you throw away your only chance to defeat these insects within the hour? Why should we trust you? Release the princess this instant! Rarity shouted while stomping a hoof. Had she been able to use her magic, she would have attacked the wild thing. They had risked detection for this, and had come too late. Why? Why should they trust her? Silence, element of generosity. I am talking to your princess. So, Twilight Sparkle, what do you say? We can either fight each other here, while the changelings alert their queen. She will be here soon, and will find either all of us weakened, or the victor close to death. What will it be? Will you fight by my side for the sake of all of Equestria, or will you take your chance and try to banish me once again? You have never done anything for the sake of Equestria. All you ever wanted was eternal night and the supreme rule of Equestria. You only want to get rid of Chrysalis because she is standing in your way. I can feel it, Nightmare Moon. You may have resurrected, but you are still weak. It can't be long since you overwhelmed Luna. Nightmare Moon cursed to herself. Had she faced the old Twilight Sparkle, who has been a mere unicorn, she might have been able to hide her weakened state. This one, however, was a fellow alicorn, with more sensitive magical senses. Could she feel the last drops of what had been Luna? This thought made her take an involuntary step back. If she could, then this would be over before it had even started. She had to know. She had to convince the elements that there was nothing left of their princess in this body. Even if you use the elements, all you will accomplish is killing me. Luna is long gone. I have consumed her completely. Lies! That simple word made Nightmare Moon's heart sink, and it hadn't even come from the alicorn. The element of laughter pointed an accusing hoof at her instead. You are just a big lying meanie! Was there nothing left of the princess, you wouldn't try to convince us of it. You would be at your full power instead of weakened, like Twilight said. What you don't realize yet, Nightmare Moon, is that she is messing with your powers from the inside. Twilight couldn't believe what Pinkie had just said. Sure, she had been shocked to hear that her mentor's sister had been consumed, but she hadn't doubted it. An intelligent being like Nightmare Moon wouldn't leave behind some lingering traces of her, would she? She concentrated her magical senses on the now threatening alicorn in front of her. She encountered heavy resistance, but, as she had felt earlier, Nightmare Moon was weakened. So much even that she alone may have been able to overtake her without the elements. Did she not realize in what shape her own body actually was? She had felt that there was something wrong from the start, but only now she realized exactly what it was. Nightmare Moon didn't have the magical muscle she had on their first encounter, by far. The fight with Luna must have taken more out of her than even she realized. But there was something else. Just as if there was a dying candle in a completely dark room. As she explored farther, Twilight felt the familiar presence of Luna, struggling against restraints made of shadows. But the indications that held were more grim than she would have imagined. Nightmare Moon had not lied about the element's use would mean her death, but it would most likely mean Luna's too. There wasn't left enough of her to survive in this battle-worn body. But what if she was to... "All right, Nightmare Moon, we won't use the elements on you now." The alicorn relaxed slightly. She had done it. The elements of harmony were on her side. What she would do with them once Chrysalis was dealt with was to be seen. "But we won't ally ourselves with you either." Twilight's friends, who had looked at her in disbelief, now looked at her confused. How were they to defeat Nightmare Moon without the elements? Nightmare Moon was about to start the fight when she felt herself being enveloped by golden magic. She looked at Twilight Sparkle, but there was no magic on her horn. Instead, the shy Pegasus standing behind her— no Pegasus. A unicorn? She checked and rechecked her memories, but there this mare clearly was a Pegasus. Nightmare Moon tried to free herself from the magical grip, but couldn't. Something was interfering with her drawing in more magical power. Looking inside her own mind, she saw Luna gripping onto her, confining her in place, making her unable to move. She tried to struggle free, but only now she felt how tired she actually was. Her legendary strength was gone. She didn't understand it, unless— "You have interfered with me." "Sure I have. I told you, you will not succeed. I am Princess Luna of Equestria, I told you, and you will not win this day." With that, Nightmare Moon felt another source of magic invading her mind. This one was a light purple, enveloping what was left of Luna and preventing her to finally get rid of the pest of a princess. Just as she wanted to resist against the invader, it was gone, and so was Luna. Her presence was completely gone from her mind. What had happened? Had she finally absorbed her? No, that wasn't what had happened at all. Nightmare Moon opened her eyes and froze. All thoughts of resisting went out of her mind as two green eyes glared back at her. Right in front of her stood— "Moon Lily." She almost spat. The former alicorn stood firm in front of her tormentor. Twilight Sparkle's plan had been ingenious. Enveloping her in her own magic and ripping her out of the darkness set her old self free. Princess Luna was no more for the moment. Instead, a unicorn mare, slightly smaller than the princess had been, stood in front of the still trapped Nightmare Moon. "I told you, you will not win, bloody shadow. I was what made you strong. What are you without me?" "True. You are what made me an alicorn in the first place. You are the thing that made all my friends avoid me. You are the only thing that made my family reject me." Before any of the elements of harmony could intervene, the freed unicorn had grabbed the alicorn's head and slammed it into the floor. She was angry. For over 1,000 years this demon had tormented her. It had made her attack her sister and terrify her subjects. Soon after repeated slamming her head into the ground, Nightmare Moon stopped struggling. Blood was now running down her face, while her eyes were bulging out. When Nightmare Moon's skull finally cracked with a sickening crunching sound, Twilight came out of her shock. She enveloped the raging unicorn unceremoniously in her magic and dragged her back through the tunnel they had come from. Closing it back behind them, Twilight levitated the group of them back up to their cell. She was shivering at the display of rage the other unicorn had just shown. Maybe it was understandable, but she surely didn't understand why. When they reached their cell, she sat down the other unicorn along with her friends. She had not protested when Twilight had grabbed her body. Now she faced her way, mustering as much sternness in her voice as she could. She was confused. She had wanted to pull out Princess Luna, but had gotten this unicorn instead. The resemblance was stunning, but her magical aura was not at all what Twilight remembered. It was more gentle, without the underlying emotions, and there was something missing. Also her cutie mark was not a crescent moon, but a blooming lily instead. "So, who are you?" she finally managed to ask. "My name is Moonlily, and I am grateful that you freed me from that demon." "What do you mean, demon? And what happened to Princess Luna?" "I am Princess Luna, in a way. This is what I looked like before I became an alicorn. I might ascend again once my strength has recovered fully. I do not know, but this is the form I was born in." "What?" This was Applejack, eyeing the newcomer suspiciously. "There are 3 ways to ascendance. The first one is to use the alicorn stone. That is how I became one. Your body merges with the soul of one of the alicorns of old. It is a corrupting influence, but the true self always lays beneath. That is why my magical color always stayed the same, even when I was an alicorn. Only on very rare occasions did I call upon my alicorn powers, which changed its color to a pale white. The second way is the same way you," she pointed at Twilight Sparkle, "became an alicorn. Another alicorn has to use their magic to make you ascend. The third one is actually the natural one. I hope my powers are great enough, once I have fully recovered, to proceed that way. Even so, I like being mortal once again. Equestria does need me as the Princess of the Night in this crisis." "What is the natural way? And what is the alicorn stone? I know of an artifact called the alicorn amulet, but surely that is not what you mean." "No, I don't. In fact, the third way will make me ascend if my magical potential is too great for my unicorn body to handle. To see if that is the case, I will have to replenish my magic, and that could take a while. A week at least, I would say." "Very well." Rarity finally recovered some of her composure. "So, what are you saying basically is that every unicorn can become an alicorn, as long as they contain more magic than their unicorn body can handle?" "Yes, that is exactly what I mean. You, Twilight Sparkle, would have ascended even without Celestia's help before long, but we usually interfere in the fate of some pony before that happens. Alicorns that ascend through Way 1 and 3 will be immortal, full alicorns. The curse of being immortal and seeing all of your friends fade away will drive most ponies into insanity. That is why we interfered and made you a fellow alicorn before your natural ascension." "So you basically prevented me from becoming immortal?" Twilight pouted. "That meant she was no full-fledged princess after all." "Yes, and you should thank Celestia for it. Had she not, you, like we, would have been the one to bury each and every one of your friends, without aging so much as a single day." Twilight's anger evaporated. She looked around at her friends, and a smile began to form on her face. Truly, she couldn't bear losing all of them, and being immortal herself. She began to understand what Celestia had done. After the moment had passed, Moonlily began to talk once more. This time, however, she explained the situation as she knew it. Ponyville had been freed under her command. What got her captured in the first place? In retrospect, she said, it had been a blessing, since she now was eternally free of her alter ego. Afterwards, she explained many things. Mostly she filled the friends in on all the details about a place she called the Garden, the Children of the Night, and their relative immortality. The topic she spoke most about, however, was a pony called Moonsinger. The only pony, she said, that she had missed even more than Celestia during her time on the moon. Chrysalis stood over the dead body of Nightmare Moon. Her anger was clearly showing. How had the Princess of the Night died? Her head was cracked open and pieces of brain matter were splattered all over the floor. The 2 guards she had stationed inside the barrier surely were not responsible for this, for they both looked like they had been crushed under a giant palm. There were traces of lingering magic in the air, but for all she knew, it could have been Nightmare Moon's magic. She had never met the crazy alicorn after all, and didn't know what its magical aura would feel like. This was just a disaster. Her plan it had been to try to convince the alicorn to join her, or to execute her in public. That stupid mule maybe had even committed suicide when she had noticed that she couldn't get through the barrier she had put up. Chrysalis didn't know, and didn't care either way. The guards had failed her, so they deserved their fate. Nightmare Moon was dead, and therefore no use for her anymore. Her drones would have her blessing if they chose to have their fun with the still warm body. What should she care? There were more pressing matters to attend to. Lately some smaller towns had been starting to revolt. With Diamond's betrayal, and her therefore being the only queen present, she had to manage the mind control of the ponies themselves. Her drones could relieve her in that to some degree, but not enough to prevent some of the spells from breaking. She had already lost Baltimore to a raid led by Moonsinger, and Dodge City was close to slip out of her grasp. The ponies there had somehow beaten her control, and were now fighting against their occupants. Pony&Wolf was another matter. The barrier around the city had prevented her drones to sneak in and investigate. "I should have gotten rid of her when I had the chance," Chrysalis mumbled to herself. She meant her daughter, of course. Diamond's betrayal had caused much more damage to her cause. More, in fact, than she had wanted to admit. Even so, her drones were loyal to her. Some of her generals had always favored Diamond. The shock of her leaving the hive for good had been enough to all but sabotage the attempt to finally overrun the Crystal Empire. Preparations had come to a halt, and the general in charge had come all the way back to Canterlot just for an audience with her. All this were delays she could and would not allow any more. She had killed the impudent general, unceremoniously. In his place was now one of her chosen ones, a changeling completely loyal to her, and her alone. Celestia stood in Pony&Wolf's town square, organizing the last few troops that had arrived from the garden about an hour ago. All of them carried several mana crystals infused with her sister's magic. It would be a quick campaign, she hoped, since none of them could stay outside the garden for too long, but their target destination was almost on the other end of Equestria. Lately a Pegasus from Dodge City had arrived in Ponyville, having heard about the resistance there. He had told them a tale of breaking mind control and resistance groups forming all over the city. They were few, but they did their best to sabotage the changelings. Knowing that Chrysalis's influence was fading had been what had pressed Celestia to ask Moonsinger for a platoon of enforcers. She would lead the charge herself this time, since it was necessary to teleport the whole group of 25,000 enforcers close to the city. Would they try to reach it on hoof, their sparks would be weakened way too much when they arrived, and some of them may be too weak after the battle to make the journey back. Moonsinger had been hesitant to agree to this, but Celestia's wounds had almost completely healed, and there was no doubt they needed every ally they could get. She herself would not be able to leave the garden for a while, since the taking of her potion weakened her too much, and the internal affairs of the garden had to be dealt with as well. There may be a war going on, but she still had to deal with resource management and teach classes. The Lunar Temple, the school for unicorns born in the garden, was her domain after all. There were qualities she looked for in the students, and finding those had priority over everything else.